What on earth had these men done to get a response like that from Jesus? What? How long would I be the minister of Centennial Christian Church if I preached that message to you? As long as it took me to get my car and take off, probably. Okay? Why? Why does Jesus preach this message to these people? One is that this is going to be the last time that he's going to have the opportunity to speak to these people. What's his motive? See, if we miss his motive, we're going to miss what he's doing here. What's his motive? Anyone? I'm sorry?
They're not talking of God, they're talking of themselves.
Okay. Yeah, they've made man-made rules as what governs them. Okay? But you know why he speaks that way to these Pharisees? Because he loves them. He is so concerned about these men that he has to kind of open the door and say, here's what's going on. The Pharisees were devoted to the law. I don't have time to go back and tell you all the history of the Pharisees. The word itself means separate. That they were going to be protecting the law. No one would ever take the law from them. And they're at the height of their influence. Everybody wanted to be a Pharisee. Because that would be like an elder in the church as far as today is concerned. But the problem was that Jesus says to the disciples, unless your righteousness exceeds theirs, you won't even get in the kingdom. That this model before me is lost. These men are religious, extremely religious, but they're not even in the kingdom because they've missed the whole point here. And when these Pharisees start hearing the message of Jesus, he's threatening them. See, that's basically, someone once told me that there are two sermons that nobody wants to hear, a good one and a bad one. Okay? These guys did not want to hear what Jesus is saying at all. And he says woe to them how many times, but the word woe, he is basically not that indiscriminately God's going to pronounce judgment upon them. He is saying to them, because you're this way, here's what's going to happen. It's because of your rejection. That's why this is going to happen. So he's going to go after them about false religion and hypocrisy. That's what his concern is. But I understand his motive. He wants to win them back. He wants them to believe the truth. There are those people that are so evil and wicked, but God still loves them, and we have a little hard time believing that. Us good people, right? R.C. Sproul was a very well-known author, and someone asked him the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And his answer was, I don't know, I've never met a good person. And his truth is there. We are not good people. There's no such thing as good people. He's talking about their faith, and he is going after them because of that. Downstairs with the young people, we just talked a little bit about Nicodemus. Jesus says to him, you're the teacher of Israel, and you don't understand these things. That when it came to being born again, when it came to believing in God the way God wants us to believe in him, Nicodemus had no idea. He was a church leader, and he had no idea. Can we possibly find ourselves in that place? Some time ago, on the last Sunday night of each month, we have a birthday fellowship. And there was one night, this has been quite some time ago, that we had quite a few more children there than we had anticipated. So when we started eating birthday cake, we could see we didn't have enough. Right? So I gave somebody a few dollars to go out to a store and buy a birthday cake, some kind of cake, so we have enough for all the kids. Okay? So they went out and they bought this really nice birthday cake. They brought it back and started to serve it to the kids. But then one of the people came to me and said, Joe, there's something wrong with that cake. Some of you know the story. It was hilarious. Okay? So I went down there and they were having trouble cutting it because the people at the store had sold us one of those styrofoam cakes. It looked like a cake. You couldn't tell the difference, but when you started to cut, that styrofoam's a little tougher than cake is. Okay? Looked like a cake, but inside it was not. We can look like a Christian, but inside, maybe not. And Jesus is the one that knows that. He can look into our hearts. He can see what's really going on at this very moment. That he knows what's in our hearts. He knows what we're thinking. So here is Jesus wanting to cause these people to wake up. Okay? That we can pretend all we want to. In fact, the word hypocrite is in the Greek culture was a person that wore different masks in a play. And he would play different parts, pretending to be something he was not. And that's what Jesus is saying to these people. So he begins to talk to them about honesty, instructing them upon what is honest. You see, the Pharisees' concern was influence instead of integrity. We got to keep up this show. We've got to keep the appearances, keep up the appearances, because we can't possibly let anybody know what's going on inside of us. See, that's one of the criticisms that I have of the church, not just our congregation, but any church, for the most part anyway, is the fact that we come to church, we sit down, and I go up to Bob and say, Bob, how are you doing? And you say, fine. But actually his life's falling apart. His house is being put together, but his life is falling apart. Okay? So he asked me, Joe, how are you doing? And I say, oh, fine, but my life is in shambles too. Okay. So Bob and I sit together, the whole church service, go home, haven't been helped a bit, have we? Because we put this wall up, we can't possibly let anybody know what's really going on. We can't possibly, because I might be vulnerable there. Do you understand that's what the church is for, support group? That if I can't talk to my brother and sister in Christ, it's not their problem, it's mine. And these Pharisees were far better than the rest of the people, right? So they were more concerned about keeping up the influence that they had. And that's where they had problems with Jesus. That he was starting to have more people follow him than them. It looked to them like that he was violating the law. Except he was violating their opinion, their speculations of the law, their interpretations of the law. And he was going to the very root of everything that was going on. They were people that performed for people. That they had this great appetite for people to approve of what they were doing. And what happens when you do that, folks? How many great spiritual giants have we seen fall in the last several years? Okay? And what happens is that we bring ourselves to a place where we don't think we're accountable to anybody. You know, I've shared with you many times, especially with young people, that when we talk, they'll say, well, Joe, it's my life, I'll live it however I want. And my question is, who told you this is your life? Okay? Adults, whoever told you this was your life? It's God's life that he has given to you. And one day you'll give an answer, account to him for how you used this life. The only thing that, and I'll mention this later, Jesus just wants us to be genuine. He wants us to be sincere. He wants us to be honest with who we are, where we're at in our life, and the concerns that we have. It's called legalism. Okay? Because they were concerned about having power more than purity. They had to have control. And the only way you can control that is to set down all the rules for all the people, whether they are right or whether they're wrong. And miss the point here. It's called legalism, and that corrupts. It corrupts completely. It destroys. It's very hollow. It's very boring, this legalism is. Jesus calls them whitewash. A whitewash is a very cheap paint that is put over. I remember Catherine Watson was a lady that lived in Rossville, and she had this old home on the south side. If you've ever been to the park, Crispin Park in Rossville, that's that big house that sits right there in the corner. I don't know how many times we painted her porch. Okay? Over and over. I bet 3 times a year we painted her porch because the paint kept chipping off. And finally I went up to her and I said, Catherine, the problem you have here is that the wood's rotten. We can paint over it all you want, but what's underneath is rotten, so it's not going to stick. We can paint ourselves as Christians and religious people, but what happens if it's rotten underneath? Eventually that's going to be exposed. It's exposed by Jesus here, and that's the problem that they're having. Rich Gregory was a gentleman that went off on his first time. He had his own law office, and it was just getting established. It was his first day in the office, and he is sitting there, and he sees this man walk in, and he thinks, boy, I got to appear to be important here. So he picks up his phone and has this imaginary conversation right in front of this man like he's a big shot, you know. So after several minutes of making this man wait for the phone call, he puts the phone down, he looks up, he says, "Can I help you?" And the man says, "I'm from the phone company, I'm here to connect your phone." We can play the part, but eventually it's going to be exposed. Why not now? Why not be honest with God now? And just put all this to the side because we're afraid of what people might think? And what are they going to think? They're going to think that you finally are honest. They're going to think that you're very concerned about your relationship to God. You're concerned about your eternity. Saying one thing and live another is hiding behind a mask, and eventually Jesus is going to pull that mask off. Queen Mary was a very famous ship years ago. I think it was set sail in 1936, and it was this magnificent ship, and they decided to retire it. They were going to make it into a museum, but they had to fix it up. So these huge chimneys that they had, what are they called?
Stacks.
Pardon me?
Stacks. Stacks.
Stack?
They call them stacks.
Okay, stacks,
Yeah.
stack, okay. Marianne's never wrong, so I'll accept that. But if I find out you gave me the wrong word, next week the sermon's about you. So they decided they had to scrape down the smokestacks, if Marianne's right, okay? But what they found out that the only thing that was left standing there was about 30 coats of paint. The smokestacks, or chimneys, had rusted out. So when they went to scrape this off, the whole thing just fell. The only thing that was holding together was the paint. The paint. Could it be with us? The only thing that holds us together is what's on the outside. What's on the inside, there's nothing there. That we're living these hollow lies that eventually are going to be found out. They're going to be found out. Be better now than it would be later. Jesus pulls the mask off. Did he not say that which is done in silence will be shouted from the housetops? That the light's going to expose all of this that is around there, and he desires that we just be honest. And then he begins to look at their hypocrisy. You see, their concern was image over substance. That's our problem many times. Okay? That we have to appear, we have to promote this image of, boy, everything's just perfect. Everything is just right. Okay? That's not. If your life is absolutely perfect this morning, if there is nothing you struggle with at all, and your faith is perfect in God, you come up here and preach and I'll sit down and listen. We all struggle in a lot of ways with a lot of things. And Jesus just wants us to understand that what is important is what's on the inside, the substance that is there. It's not walking around saying, "Oh, look how religious I am." That's not going to get us anywhere. Because the word religious, used several times in the Bible, is the same word we could translate superstition. It's a matter of just luck. It's a matter of I believe something, therefore it has to be true, even though that it's not. He looks at the hypocrisy they're showing, that they're concentrating on the outside and they're disregarding what's on the inside. They go after the details, ignore the principles. They're after keeping the letter of the law, which nobody can, but that's what they were concerned about. You can only travel 3/8 of a mile on the Sabbath, according to the Pharisees. Anything over that was a sin. You can tie your shoe, but you can't tie your donkey to a post, because it's a different kind of knot, and that knot is illegal to tie on the Sabbath. See, that just, you could go on and on and on about some of the things that they forced upon people. And Jesus is one bunch of hypocrites. Only 3/8 of a mile on the Sabbath. You know what the Pharisees did? They built these little sheds every 3/8 of a mile. So they could travel 3/8 of a mile, rest for a little bit, go on. Always finding some kind of loophole around what the law was. And Jesus looks at them and says, "You hypocrite." Now, a hypocrite is a very strong word to use. We're not talking about someone that is weak and shallow in their faith and struggling. We're talking about someone that promotes themselves to be something that they're not. And he just wants us to be genuine. He just wants us to be authentic with this. The trouble with tradition is that we find ourselves more concerned about form than faith. There have been a few times I've asked you the question, Does our worship service have to be like this every Sunday? Do we have to follow this? Is this the only, was this inspired by God that this is the way that the worship service has to be? And the answer is, absolutely not. If we're comfortable with it, if it's something that helps us in our worship, absolutely. But if it becomes an obstruction to us really worshiping God, we need to do what? The idea is to be authentic. The idea is to worship God. One of the things that I notice is that churches that are going forward and everything, it's services, there's a lot of interaction. I'd love for you folks to talk. I'd love for you to respond. I can remember as a new Christian, the struggle I had with the minister when he preached on a certain subject, and I had so many questions. And people used to get upset at me because on the line going out with a preacher preaching, trapping. And they're trying to get to, we got to beat the other churches to VIPs and the table and, to eat. So we can't wait. We got to get out. We got to get there. Okay? But we need just to be open and say whatever causes the encouragement for people to worship, that's what we need to do. No matter what it might be. That's what we need to do. Pharisees would stand up and have all kinds of problems with that. See, the problem is the order of our worship. Ron and Joanne will clean this up later, right? The problem with the worship is that our traditions, the way we do this, ends up superseding the Word of God. Turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 15. Verse 1 is where we're going to look at here. We'll probably go through the first 12 verses here very quickly, if we can. Begin verse 1. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Please don't read this to your children. Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother must be put to death." That part you can read to your children. "But you say that if a man says to his father or mother, 'Whatever help you might otherwise have received from me is a gift devoted to God,' he is not to honor his father with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men." Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth is what makes him unclean." Then the disciples came to him and asked, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?" Now we're going to stop there because Jesus basically says later, "You ain't seen nothing yet." But notice, in the days of Jesus, there's the problem. But where did the quote come from that Jesus used there? Isaiah, 700 years before Jesus comes to earth. The same problem exists. It exists constantly in some places with some people. This idea that the way we do these things is the only way they can be done. And anybody that doesn't do it the way I want it to be done is guilty of sinning against God, I think, somehow. So I think that we have to understand that John chapter 4, the one with the well. You Jews worship in Jerusalem, and we are up here in Sychar, Mount Gerizim. Who's right? And Jesus said at this moment the Jews are right, but the time's going to come that it's not going to matter where you worship God, but where you worship God how? Spirit and truth. So he sees that their hypocrisy is getting in the way of God. Wouldn't that be horrible if he could look at Centennial Christian Church and say to us that you go to the four corners of the earth to make converts and you make them twice the children of hell that you are? Wow. He probably wouldn't last here very long, would he? So I am convinced that if Jesus came today and he preached the truth today, that we'd crucify him. The church people would. He'd never have a chance to get out into the world. We would crucify him because he's violating what we feel comfortable with. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? I mean, who crucified him the first time? The religious leaders of the day. because they couldn't take the truth that he was sharing with them. When ritual and ceremony take place of faith and obedience, that we believe that somehow we can gain God's approval by doing all the right things. Do you understand that in biblical Christianity, as we look at what God's Word says here, there is nothing that you can do to get God to love you more. And there is nothing you can do to cause God to love you less. That's what it's based on. He loves you. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. His love is so great. And we spend a lot of our time trying to gain God's favor. And I don't have to. It's like Pete Brady trying to become my friend. Never going to happen, Pete. But we're already friends. And it's not by what we do, it's because of who we are and the relationship that we have. Same way with God. We're missing the point. Boy, you know, sometimes I don't feel like a good Christian, Joe. We're not. We're saved by grace all the way through this because of His love for us. And we need to quit trying to gain His favor by keeping all the rules, because I already have His favor in His Son. In His Son. So Jesus looked at their what's going on here, and they're so concerned. You know, someone once said that a hypocrite is the one that complains there's too much sexual violence on the DVR. Did you catch that? Too much sexual violence on TV. I think that's what that off button's for. So to complain and not do anything about it, that we become hypocrites because we're just concerned about the form of this. You see, their concern was with the Pharisees to conform, not convert. I believe that one of the greatest sins that the church in general commits is when we promote God in a way that says, you've got to become just like us to be a part of us. You've got to agree completely the way we believe to be a part of us. Well, if there was an orchestra playing and they're all the same instrument, how long would we listen to that? You know, it's come to me many years ago that every one of us is just a little bit different. Some of us are really different, okay? But we're all a little bit different. So why would we believe that we all would worship God the same way? Now, it's got to be through Christ. But why would we think that we got to conform everybody to the way we do it? Okay? I'm always looking at ways that we might be able to express our worship in fresh ways, to really convict people of what we're doing here and not just going through a church service. Converted or perverted? Jesus asked the Pharisees. Wouldn't it be a shame if he looked at his church and said, it'd be better off if you didn't preach me to people? That what you're doing here is, like I said, that he says here, that you're making people your clones? That's not what this is about. I never want that. I've had preachers say, you mean all the people in your church don't believe on this the way you do, Joe? No, I want you to have your own thoughts. It's got to be biblically based, but I want you to search for those truths yourself. And maybe we don't see communion the same way, but who says we have to? See, it's something that we have to look at the meaning that's behind this. Paul did tell Timothy in decency and order, but he didn't say it had to be exactly this way. That we are to express our worship in a lot of ways. Hypocrisy drives people away from God. Hypocrisy keeps people out of the kingdom. There was this older preacher many, many years ago. His name was Willie Elrod. And he preached in a small little church in this small little town where I was living at the time. And he came up to me, I don't know where I was at, but he stopped me on the street or something, and we were talking, and he said, you know what happened to me Sunday? And I said, what was that, Willie? He said, well, I was going to preach this sermon, but I had a couple of young guys come in with long hair and rings, and boy, my sermon was telling those guys what God said about that. And all the time, Willie is standing there smoking a cigar. Hypocrisy. Jesus is going to hold us accountable for our attitudes and our actions. what they really are. And at the very end, he offers this invitation. You see, Jesus is more concerned about righteousness than he is about reputation. I know of a family several years ago that I spent a lot of time with. They were very good friends of mine, and we talked about their relationship to Christ. And finally, they told me that they were just afraid of what their friends would say. They knew what they needed to do. They understood it very well. They were almost heartbroken. They were crying when they told me this. But he was someone who was very high up in Watsika here as far as the social class is concerned. And if he became a Christian, they don't know what would happen. And they're afraid of their what? Reputation. And they rejected their eternity. I hope not now. I haven't seen them in several years. I hope somewhere along the line they became a little wiser. But we just cannot because of the reputation that we have. We have to be very careful that our faith does not become empty ritual, that our faith doesn't become ceremony, that we're going to hide behind this mask because we're afraid of what people might say. But you see, Jesus, as he shares with these people, is more concerned about conviction than he is condemnation. He doesn't want these men lost. Is he angry at them? I think. Absolutely. Because of what they were doing to the Word of God. But he wasn't going to just shove them to the wayside. We've talked in Sunday school class. We're going through Exodus right now. And we're about ready to go across the Red Sea. Do you think that God celebrated when all those Egyptians were killed when the Red Sea came back together? Those are souls that were lost. He doesn't want these people, these Pharisees, to be lost. He doesn't want them to be destroyed. He's not saying this to just completely put them away. He's trying to convict them. If we will listen closely, and I think that one of the reasons I wanted this video played is I think that we come very close to the attitude that Jesus had at that time. When these men walked away, he was heartbroken. He was heartbroken. He came to save them. And I don't know how many of you have ever grown up on the farm. Anybody? You ever seen the storm come up and see that hen run around and grab those little chickens with her wings and brings them back in and protects them? That's exactly what he wants to do with us. But he said you would not. You wouldn't get honest. You wouldn't really be authentic. You had to hide behind this mask. This is the last invitation that Jesus is going to come. The time's coming and it's all going to come to an end here. And he's standing before these people, begging them that it's time to become honest with God. I still have to believe, as these Pharisees walked away, they knew he was right. A couple of them were, at least. It appears that Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, their heart was changed at the end of the ministry of Jesus. It appears that some listened. But folks, are you going to come to church this morning and get up and walk out here the same that you were when you came? It's nothing that you have to come to me and tell me all about. It's something you've got to go to God and tell him all about. That you've been lying, that you haven't been honest, that you have not really come to him and confessed. We can fake our way through life only so far. Only so far. Jesus is more concerned about repentance and restoration than anything else, because he understands what is hanging about us. He doesn't want us to be destroyed. He wants us to be restored. He doesn't demand perfection. He just demands sincerity, to be authentic, to desire to do his will. And what we see here, what I see here in Matthew 23, is that Jesus loved these people enough to face them with the truth. Period. There was a particular church many years ago. King Louis XIV was the king, and he showed up at church one Sunday and nobody else was there. And he couldn't figure out what was going on, so the minister that was there came up and King Louis asked him, what's going on? And he said, well, I announced for this coming Sunday that you, King Louis XIV, would not be in church, because I want to find out who was going to worship God and who was here to flatter the king. Are we here to worship? The only way that we can do that is just be honest. Say, here I am, God, with all my imperfections that he already knows. See, it's not a matter of us telling God, it's a matter of us confessing to ourselves that we've missed the mark here. We've played with this long enough. Long enough. Will you continue to do that? Or we can get honest. Just say, here we are. Here we are. Our hymn of invitation and dedication this morning that we're going to share together is Softly and Tenderly. If you're looking at the hymnal, it's 389. We missed by one in the bulletin. 389, Softly and Tenderly. And he is calling. So just listen. Just listen. He is calling. I think of the great invitation in Matthew 11. Come to me, you are burdened. You know what his invitation to them is? Away from all the religious gobbledygook. Just to come to him and allow him to restore us to his God. Let's stand together as we sing, I think, the first, second, and fourth verses of Softly and Tenderly.